out there. I think we've covered, we've scaled Mount Jerry. We're not going to have anything else. And man, almost like
it's like the peak is hidden in the clouds.
It's like the hours after we put that out.
He was a whirlwind of slapstick brilliance, a comic genius who revolutionized the way the world laughed. But behind Jerry Lewis's zany grin and legendary routines lies a story far more complex and far darker than most fans ever imagined. From riotous film sets to icy family estrangements, from career triumphs to whispered scandals, Lewis's legacy is a tapestry of contradiction. Who was the real king of comedy? A misunderstood visionary, or a man hiding chilling truth behind the laughter? This is not just a biography, it's an excavation. Buckle up as we journey into the dazzling highs and haunting lows of Jerry Lewis's two-faced reign. The birth of a goofball, from Joseph Levish to Jerry Lewis. To truly understand Jerry Lewis, the manic energy, the split-second timing, the undercurrent of melancholy that ran beneath every pratfall we have, to rewind to his beginning, to the boy behind the clown. Born Joseph Levish on March 16, 1926 in Newark, New Jersey, he entered a world already vibrating with performance. His father, Daniel Levish, known as Danny Lewis on stage, was a vaudeville entertainer who could never quite catch the big break. His mother, Rachel, a Warsaw-born pianist, accompanied silent films and played smoky clubs. Their modest home thrummed with music, stress, and ambition, a combustible mix that shaped the boy watching from the wings.
Jerry Lewis, born Joseph Levish on 16 March 1926 in New Jersey, was a beloved American comedian, actor, singer, and filmmaker. He rose to fame as one half of the iconic comedy duo Martin and Lewis, alongside Dean Martin.
Young Joseph was sensitive, hungry for validation, desperate to matter. His earliest stabs at comedy came from chaos once. Sensing a boiling argument between his parents, he quietly swapped the sugar with salt on the kitchen table. The bitter coffee that followed erupted in confusion, sputtering outrage, and finally, laughter. That moment, those reluctant chuckles, lodged in his memory, it was power, it was an escape, and it tasted better than sugar ever could. He pursued the feeling relentlessly. At just 15, Joseph debuted a bizarre record act where he lip-synced to popular songs, miming along with rubbery expressions and exaggerated gestures. It was strange, it was brave, but it wasn't quite enough. A booking in Buffalo drew stone-faced silence. No boos, just the hollow, suffocating quiet of indifference. He fled the stage in shame. The dream felt dead. He worked as a soda jerk, an usher, a coatroom boy. He watched other acts from the shadows, a silent spectator to the life he'd tried and failed to claim. Then came Max Coleman, a gravel-voiced family friend from his father's vaudeville days, who found the dejected teenager and said simply, "The stage isn't done with you yet, kid." Those words lit something in Joseph, fragile but fierce. He wasn't done either. With his confidence slowly stitching itself back together, he turned to the Catskills, the Borscht Belt, where young Jewish comics were forged in front of unforgiving resort crowds. There, among cheap curtains and tired punchlines, Joseph Levish would begin to find his rhythm. And there, too, destiny quietly waited in the wings, taller, smoother, and crooning in Italian. Soon, Joseph would shed his given name. He would become Jerry Lewis. But the wide-eyed boy who once swapped sugar for salt would never truly leave. That goofball would grow into a comedy king, still aching to be seen, still desperate to be loved. The meteoric rise of Martin and Lewis, from the rustic comedy clubs of the Catskills to the roaring crowds of Manhattan nightclubs. A seismic comedic shift was quietly forming, and it wouldn't arrive solo. The spark was lit in New York's modest yet electric Glass Hat Club, where a gangly, unpredictable 19-year-old Jerry Lewis crossed paths with the smooth, effortlessly charming crooner Dean Martin. At first glance, they were an unlikely pairing. Martin, all suave elegance and effortless cool. Lewis, a whirlwind of slapstick energy, nervous tics, and manic facial contortions. But chemistry doesn't always come neatly packaged sometimes. It explodes into brilliance.
Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis. Together, They formed one of the fastest growing and most popular comedy teams of the 20th century. Appearing in 16 feature films in just 8 short years, this team's meteoric rise to success was astonishing.
In July 1946, fate took the stage in Atlantic City's infamous 500 Club. Martin was booked as the musical headliner, and Lewis, billed separately, brought his chaotic physical comedy to a modest audience. When an act dropped out at the last minute, Lewis made a gutsy suggestion. What if Dean joined him on stage? It was uncharted territory, 2 performers, vastly different, improvising a new kind of act live. Their first attempt, a spectacular flop. The act bombed. Audiences were confused, management unimpressed. Skinny D'Amato, the club's notorious owner, didn't mince words, get good or get out. Faced with failure, the duo threw the rulebook away. Gone were the scripted jokes. In their place, raw, anarchic improvisation, Lewis transformed into a wild monkey, bouncing off the walls, heckling Martin mid-song, dousing the crowd in seltzer and unleashing chaos. Martin played the perfect foil, the unflappable organ grinder to Lewis's unhinged antics. The result, magic. The audience erupted into uncontrollable laughter. Something new had been born, a comedy style that felt alive, unpredictable, and utterly addictive. Word spread fast. The 500 Club became their launch pad. And from there, Martin and Lewis skyrocketed. Their sold-out shows at the Copacabana Club solidified them as the hottest act in town. By 1948, NBC handed them their own radio program, The Martin and Lewis Show, broadcasting their banter into homes across America. In 1949, Hollywood came calling. Paramount Pictures signed the duo, and their film debut, My Friend Irma, though intended as a modest supporting role, became a platform they hijacked with infectious energy. Over 6 whirlwind years, Martin and Lewis would star in 14 box office hits. Their blend of chaos and charm revolutionized American comedy. They weren't just entertainers. They were an unstoppable cultural phenomenon. But the faster you rise, the greater the pressure. Fame, ego, and imbalance soon cast long shadows over their partnership. In the golden kingdom they had built, cracks were already beginning to show. The roar of audiences still thundered through concert halls, and box office numbers soared, but behind the blinding lights and synchronized bows, a cold distance had begun to settle between Martin and Lewis. Their partnership, once defined by electric chemistry and improvisational magic, now trembled under the strain of fame, ego, and imbalance. Publicly, they smiled. Privately, their laughter had long faded. Then came the image that many regard as the symbolic rupture of their bond. Look magazine, 1954, Jerry Lewis on the cover alone. The photo had originally featured both men, but Dean Martin was cleanly, coldly cropped out. To many, it was more than editorial preference. It was a visual betrayal, a broadcasted declaration that Jerry was the act, the brain, the star. Dean, once the co-pilot in their comedic rocket ship, was increasingly portrayed as merely the charming passenger. Behind closed doors, old whispers now shouted in headlines and gossip columns. Lewis was the innovator, the future. Martin, just the pretty face. Jerry had become the darling of directors, the muse of critics, the one producers fawned over. Dean, deeply proud and increasingly bitter, bristled at being cast as the straight man, a role he never signed up to be. With each passing performance, the warmth between them waned. The timing remained impeccable, but the trust, the joy was eroding fast. By the time they began shooting Hollywood or Bust in 1956, their dynamic was irreversibly broken. On set, the tension was suffocating. They spoke only when required, their dialogue a brittle echo of their former brilliance. Each scene was a masterclass in professionalism, but also in restraint, in the art of burying resentment beneath forced smiles. Fans remained oblivious. The film, like the others, was a hit. But to those who knew them, it was clear the end was near. It came on July 25, 1956 at the Copacabana Club, the very venue where they had first ascended to stardom exactly 10 years earlier. There were no speeches, no farewells, just a performance, followed by an emotionally vacant goodbye. Just like that, the most beloved comedy duo in America was no more. For Jerry Lewis, the aftermath was hollow. Stripped of his partner and the identity they had built together, he spiraled into a sea of self-doubt. Adrift in Las Vegas with his wife Patty, he questioned everything. Then came the call. Judy Garland was ill. Sid Luft, her husband and manager, was desperate. He needed someone who could save the show tonight. That someone was Jerry Lewis, alone, for the first time. The solo sovereign reinvention, innovation, and absolute control. The night Jerry Lewis stepped into Judy Garland's spotlight in Las Vegas marked more than just an emergency fill-in. It ignited a personal revolution. The stakes were immense. He had just severed ties with Dean Martin, was riddled with uncertainty, and the industry buzz hinted at his best days being behind him. But Lewis didn't just perform, he exploded. Every pratfall, every perfectly timed punchline proved that he wasn't half of a duo. He was an entire act unto himself. The standing ovation at the end of the night didn't just celebrate a show, it crowned a reinvention. That single, serendipitous performance launched a solo trajectory that even skeptics couldn't deny. A record deal followed swiftly, capturing the energy of that night. Then came a headlining residency at the Sands Hotel and Casino Vegas royalty. Jerry Lewis had emerged not just intact, but elevated, transformed. No longer the monkey to Dean Martin's organ grinder. He was now his own machine of comedy and charisma. From 1956 to 1959, Lewis hosted the Academy Awards 3 times, showcasing his unmatched command over a live audience and cementing his place not only as a comic but as a showman of the national significance. But it was in 1959 that he made his boldest move, yet a historic contract with Paramount Pictures that handed him full creative control. Lewis wasn't just starring in films, now he was writing them, directing them, editing them. Hollywood had never seen anything like it, a single performer with the authority and vision of an entire studio.
My father taught me about the importance of respecting your audience. Don't walk out on that stage believing they'll be there because you're there. Bull. They're there because they want to see you.
The following year tested that power. With Cinderfella delayed, Paramount needed a summer release. Most stars would balk. Lewis got to work. Between nightly stage shows in Miami, he wrote, directed, produced, and starred in The Bellboy. It was an audacious and near-silent film in an era of dialogue-heavy comedy. It also introduced a groundbreaking invention video, Assist. By wiring a video camera to the film camera, Lewis could instantly review each take on a monitor, no need to wait for dailies. It transformed filmmaking, and his legacy behind the camera was secured. Paramount, however, wasn't impressed at first. The unconventional film drew doubts, and the studio pulled support. Undeterred, Lewis finished it with his own money. The Bellboy was released in 1960 to major acclaim and box office success. Jerry had gambled everything and won, but power has a shadow. As he soared, Lewis became increasingly ruthless. Young comic Sammy Petrillo, often compared to a young Lewis, found himself signed and then benched by MCA, Lewis's agency. When Petrillo and partner Duke Mitchell attempted a Martin and Lewis style act, rumors swirled that Lewis used his influence to blacklist them. The velvet glove of laughter, it seemed, concealed an iron grip. Now, at the height of fame, Jerry Lewis was no longer just a performer, he was a comedic emperor. But even emperors hear echoes. The laughter was louder than ever, but behind it all, the ghost of Dean Martin still whispered a lingering ache that success couldn't quite silence. A house divided in fidelity, divorce, and a father's cruelest cut. As Jerry Lewis cemented his status as a comedy icon, raking in millions, headlining Vegas, and redefining slapstick, his home life grew more fractured with each punchline. Fame had handed him creative dominance in Hollywood, but no amount of applause could quiet the storms brewing inside his own house. For nearly 4 decades, his wife Patty Palmer endured what many would have fled from: endless rumors, emotional withdrawal, and his open, unapologetic infidelity. Publicly, they kept up appearances, privately, their marriage was cracking under the weight of betrayal. In 1980, the charade collapsed. Patty filed for divorce, finally walking away from the man America adored, but who, in private, she had come to fear and resent.
He was a major film star, plus comedian, plus, he was just an icon of the day. And he did tell great stories for families. It was Disney. I said, okay, I'll meet with him. So I did, and he said, here's what I'm going to do.
It wasn't long before Jerry found a new muse. Sandy Pitnick, a former Las Vegas dancer and flight attendant, met Lewis on the set of Hardly Working. She soon became not only his co-star, but his partner for life. They married in 1983 and later adopted a daughter, Danielle, in the early 90s. For the outside world, it seemed like Jerry had finally mellowed. He smiled more, spoke warmly of family, but the truth was darker. His affection for this new chapter came at a brutal cost to the old one. Despite suffering serious heart attacks in 1960, 1982, and again in 2006, Lewis remained active and prolific until his final years. When he passed away in 2017 at 91, many expected a complicated but reconciliatory end to the family drama that had trailed him for decades. Instead, his last act spoke louder than any interview or biography could. In a will that shocked the public and devastated his children, Jerry Lewis left everything to Sandy and Danielle. His 6 sons with Patty, including the troubled and estranged Joseph, who died in 2009, were entirely, explicitly disinherited. The fallout was immediate and raw. Anthony Lewis called his father emotionally abusive, but admitted to some conflicted affection. Gary Lewis, the eldest and a former pop star, minced no words. He labeled Jerry mean and evil, a man who had shown his children nothing but coldness. Whatever public charm Jerry had wielded throughout his career, his sons claimed it never reached behind closed doors. In the end, Jerry Lewis's estate became not just a fortune, but a final judgment. A man who brought laughter to millions left his own family in anguish, cut out, cast aside, and burdened with the haunting silence of a father who, even in death, had the last word.
Feel to yourself, you recognize there's not a lot of time left. I don't like that part. I don't like that part at all.
Allegations and a complicated legacy. The final curtain on Jerry Lewis's life did not bring only applause. When his will was made public in 2017, it delivered a gut punch that reignited long-standing questions about the man behind the laughter. Lewis disinherited all 6 sons from his first marriage, leaving everything to his second wife and adopted daughter. The cruelty of the gesture stunned even longtime fans, but the true reckoning was still to come. In 2022, a Vanity Fair expose detonated a long-buried minefield. Several actresses who had worked with Lewis in the 1960s, decades after his peak fame, stepped forward with harrowing accounts. Among them were names like Karen Sharp and Hope Holiday, both describing Lewis as controlling, verbally abusive, and, more disturbingly, sexually predatory. They recounted incidents behind closed doors, tales of coercion, intimidation, and physical aggression that transformed the king of comedy into a figure of menace. In a recent article by Vanity Fair in February 2022, it was revealed that some of Lewis's former co-stars from the 1960s had bravely spoken out about allegations of sexual assault, harassment, and verbal abuse. The stories were not only damning, they were deeply at odds with the carefully curated image Lewis had long projected. For many, he was the tireless telethon host who helped raise over $2 billion for muscular dystrophy research. For others, he was a visionary filmmaker who brought slapstick into the modern age, breaking technical ground and reshaping American comedy. But these new revelations struck a jarring note, an unmasking that shook even those who had once idolized him. While no legal consequences ever came of the allegations, many due to the time that had passed, they remain indelibly tied to Lewis's legacy. The accused man was no longer alive to face them, to confirm or deny. This silence left only competing narratives: the genius who made millions laugh versus the man alleged to have caused private suffering behind the scenes. The complexity was echoed in one of Lewis's rarest public acts of vulnerability, the 1976 Muscular Dystrophy Association telethon moment, when Frank Sinatra brought out Dean Martin for a surprise reunion. After 20 years of silence, the two men embraced, and for a fleeting second, the old magic returned. It was broadcast live to millions, a cultural catharsis. But beneath the cheers lay questions that never fully faded. Was it forgiveness, or just to show a PR stunt, or a genuine thawing of decades-old frost? Even Lewis's final years were marked by contradiction. He gave brutally honest interviews, often teetering between brilliance and bitterness. He lashed out at modern comedians, dismissed critics, and showed flashes of the same defiance that had once made him a trailblazer. Yet, that same steeliness now made the darker stories harder to ignore. Today, Jerry Lewis occupies a rare, uncomfortable space in American entertainment history. His contributions are undeniable: a master of physical comedy, a pioneer of filmmaking technique, a tireless advocate for charity. But so are the shadows of a strange family, silenced voices, and unresolved pain. He made generations laugh, but like the echo of a punchline after the crowd has quieted, questions remain. Legacy, for Jerry Lewis, is no longer a standing ovation. It is a mirror cracked down the center, reflecting both brilliance and blight in equal measure. The final bow, a legacy of laughter and pain. The allegations, unresolved and haunting, force an uneasy reckoning. How do we reconcile comedic brilliance with alleged monstrosity? The name Jerry Lewis still sparks memories of wild energy, contorted faces, an irreverent genius, a man who turned chaos into art, who made generations laugh until they cried. But beneath that iconic slapstick exterior was a story far more complicated. Before Lewis, comedy was buttoned up, predictable. He tore the seams, reinvented the form. His influence was seismic. Steve Martin, Richard Pryor, Jim Carrey all inherited his fearlessness. Carrey once said Lewis stretched the boundaries of reality so far, it became an act of anarchy. And it's true, Jerry changed what comedy could be. Yet the innovator was also, by many accounts, a tyrant behind the scenes, a man accused by family of cruelty, by colleagues of harassment and abuse. He raised billions for muscular dystrophy while cutting his own children out of his will. He brought joy to millions while allegedly leaving scars on those closest to him. In Lewis's life, genius and cruelty were uneasy bedfellows, forcing us to ask, can the work be separated from the man? In the end, Lewis left us not a clean legacy, but a jagged one-part masterpiece, part cautionary tale. The king of comedy took his final bow, but the echoes of his art and the whispers of his darkness refused to fade. His encore, like his life, remains unresolved, an unsettling chord that lingers in the history of laughter. Jerry Lewis redefined comedy, fearless, frenetic, unforgettable, but his legacy is more than laughter. It's a haunting paradox of brilliance and cruelty, genius and pain. He left behind a blueprint for modern comedy and a trail of deeply personal scars. Was he a hero, a villain, or both? Maybe that's the mystery that keeps his story so compelling. If this glimpse into the two faces of Jerry Lewis fascinated you, don't stop here. Hit that subscribe button, give this video a like, and turn on notifications so you won't miss the untold stories of Hollywood's brightest stars and darkest secrets. The spotlight is just getting started.